The whole event of photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. We are talking about eukaryotic photosynthesis. Now, do some bacteria photosynthesize? Yes. But we're not talking about them today. We're talking about the chloroplast. So it's eukaryotic because the bacteria that photosynthesize, they don't have a chloroplast because this is actually a membrane-bound organelle. Not just one membrane, it's actually two membranes. And hopefully you remember that from your chapter 6 content. Now, if you look inside the chloroplast, you see these sacs. Each sac is called a thylakoid. And then the stack of thylakoids is called the granum. You know, I love food so much, it looks like pancake on a plate. Do you agree? Yeah. Now, the only difference is my pancake will be like this high, right? You know, that was a joke. All right. So each pancake is a thylakoid, but the stack of pancakes is the granum. Now, the space in between here is fluid filled. That means it is a space, but it has fluid in there. So one of my students, after hearing my sick pancake joke, raised his hand and said, "Can I call that the syrup?" Yeah, why not? The syrup is the stroma. Good. 50% of you will confuse it with this one, the stoma, which is also called stomata. Prove me wrong on the exam or quiz. Some other students will forget, was it stroma or was it stoma? I can't remember, stroma or stoma. And they write stromata. Are you catching what they're doing? They can't remember if it's this one or this one. So they create a new word that does not exist. There is no such thing as stromata. There is either the stroma or the stoma or stomata, but there's no stromata. I mean, I'll give you credit for being creative, but you'll still get that question wrong. Now, how do I remember it? The stroma has an R, like the chloroplast has an R. You see that? I gotta find ways to remember things. Because the stomata is something completely different. The stroma is the fluid-filled space inside the chloroplast. And because both of them have R, that's how I remember. The stroma is the fluid-filled space inside the chloroplast. The stoma, which does not have the R, is a completely different structure. It's on the bottom of the leaf, and it opens up to let gas exchange occur. It's like your mouth. You open your mouth to breathe in and out. The stomata opens up to allow CO2 in and oxygen out. Remember, it is opposite what you do. You breathe in oxygen, breathe out CO2. This one does the opposite. Now, can someone tell me, when the stomata is open, can something else leak out? And what would that be? Something very precious. Say? Flowers? Fruits? No. What's the most precious liquid in life?
Water.
There it is. It can lose water. If I asked that same question to my son, he'd probably say Coca-Cola, right? He loves that. Right? It's water, actually. So, through the stomata, gas exchange occurs, but the plant risks losing water when the stomata is open. But it has to be open to allow for the gas exchange to occur. So we'll find out what happens to plants. On a hot day, for example, On a hot day, what will the plant do? Will it open the stomata and dehydrate to death? Or will it close it and so forth? We'll figure that out later. For today, we're focusing on photosynthesis. But I'm introducing to you the stomata here today, but we'll factor that in later. Yeah, probably on Monday, okay? That's the second half of the chapter, which will go by real quick. So if we look at the overall reaction of photosynthesis, again, this is review now. Energy from the sun, CO2 from the air, water from the roots. This arrow here is photosynthesis. It makes glucose and oxygen. So CO2 is receiving electrons and becoming sugar, glucose. So CO2 is being reduced. Remember, reduction is when you give something an electron, you call that reduced. So in photosynthesis, CO2 is reduced into glucose. At the same time, here we go. This one is the tough one. Water breaks apart into its three parts. I mean, look at the three parts of water. It's on the screen. Hydrogen, oxygen, you can't see the third one, but they're there, electrons. Mazen, focus here, please. Hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons. Those are the three parts of water. And during photosynthesis, that water that you give to the plant will literally split into its three parts. And what are the three parts? Hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons. And the name of the process is water splitting. So the water that you give to your plants will do two things to the plant. Number one, hydrate it. So the enzymes are active and all that, because we saw what happens when the bean that doesn't have water doesn't do it. So you give water to the plant to obviously hydrate the plant. But a lot of students don't understand this until they take photosynthesis. You also give water to the plant to carry out this process. Without water, this does not happen. You're going to split water into its three parts, and it's called water splitting: hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons. We have to deal with each one of these things. Well, we already know what happens to oxygen, I hope, if you're listening. What happens to oxygen? It leaves through the... Say it. Stomata. Nice, I'm listening to that. Stomata. So we know already what happens to this guy. Oxygen will leave through the stomata. We're done with that one. We need to know what happens with these two. And this is where the fun begins. Now, before we go there, let me show you all the parts to this. There are two reactions that are carried out. Collectively, they're called photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is actually the combination of the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. The light reaction happens in the thylakoids, these guys. The pancakes. The light reactions happen here. The other one is the Calvin cycle. It happens in stroma, the syrup. Stroma, right here. So we have to know the names of the reactions and where they occur. Light reaction is in the thylakoid. The Calvin cycle is in the stroma, the one with the R, because this is happening in the chloroplast. All right, here's the other thing. The Calvin cycle is the one that's actually making the sugar. But to make the sugar, it needs energy. It needs electrons. It needs phosphate. So the Calvin cycle says, I wish I can just interact with the sun and get it over with. If I can only interact with the sun, then I won't need the light reaction. But that's not what happens. The components of the Calvin cycle cannot directly get the energy from the sun. They need energy, but they cannot directly get it from the sun. Something has to deliver it to the Calvin cycle. And these are the delivery trucks for energy and phosphate, electrons and hydrogen. These are the delivery trucks. So these are actually made in the light reaction. So the light reaction is the one that's dealing with the sun, loading the trucks, ATP and NADPH, and then the trucks go to the Calvin cycle for delivery. Does all of that sound familiar? It sounds the same as what? Cellular respiration. Yeah, it's just in reverse. That's all. If you really pay attention to photosynthesis, you'll realize something. And I had a student in my 7 o'clock class. He came to me after class and he showed me how he now finally understands that why I say it's in reverse. He said this, Dr. Saad, I just realized something. Yeah. In cellular respiration, we take the glucose and the final product is ATP. Good. After he listened to this, he said, oh, you have to make the ATP first to eventually make the glucose. Yeah, because it's reversed. And you'll see it. The light reaction which happens in the thylakoids involve the splitting of water, like I told you, in its 3 parts: hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons. The release of the oxygen, like I told you, through the stomata. We dealt with that one. The loading of the trucks, NADPH and ATP. Remember, the NADPH and the ATP deliver their cargo to the Calvin cycle. Because the Calvin cycle cannot interact directly with the sun. So the Calvin cycle says, I need energy, I need phosphate, I need electrons, I need. I wish I can just directly deal with the sun to get all of that, but I can't. So I'll wait for the light reaction to bring them to me. Because it's the light reaction, get it? The light reaction that's what's dealing with the sun. So here's the bird's eye view of the whole event. You have light, water, and the empty trucks feeding into the light reaction. These are the things going into the reaction, and these are the things coming out. Oxygen will leave through the stomata. Very good. I'm going to catch you a couple of times on that. Watch out. Stomata. So now you have loaded trucks. The loaded trucks are going to go to the Calvin cycle, and it's the Calvin cycle that makes the sugar. But none of this can happen unless the carbon dioxide comes in through the stomata. Very good. This is my way of reinforcing it. Stomata. So this is the bird's eye view. Again, the arrows going in are the things being used. The arrows coming out are the things being produced. It's actually the Calvin cycle that's actually producing the sugar. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of things, I have to give you a whole physics class on light in 1 slide or 2 slides. It's sort of like that thermodynamics. Remember those 2 slides on the first law of thermodynamics? I'm not saying you need to know all the properties of light. No. You need to know enough to get you by here. And what I'm about to say is all you need to know. Light travels in mysterious ways there. It is both a particle called a photon, but it can also travel as a wave. And the visible light has a range of waves. And they range from 380 nanometers to 750 nanometers. Collectively, that range in the spectrum there is called visible light. That means your eye can see this. So it has a range. It goes from purple to blue to green, yellow. So 380 nanometers to 750 nanometers. And your eye can see all those gradations of colors. White light, the light coming from the sun, is actually a mixture of all of them together. So white light, when you split it up, you produce the gradation of colors. How do you do that? Well, in the lab, we can take white light, pass it through what is called a prism, and it separates the different wavelengths of light. In nature, you can see that once in a while as a what? As a rainbow. The light coming from the sun will hit the water droplets in the air, and it doesn't have to be raining. I mean, it happens more often after a rainstorm, but it doesn't have to have all you have to do is have water in the air. And that acts like little tiny prisms. And the light hits that water droplet and splits the light into its different wavelengths. And you look at it and say, oh, look at that beautiful rainbow. There it is. So it's all the different wavelengths of light. So white light is actually a mixture of these things. So I have a white lab coat on. Why do you see it as white? Because the pigment of my white lab coat is reflecting all of those wavelengths into your eye. So the pigment in my lab coat is not absorbing any of these. It's actually reflecting all of them into your eye as a mixture of things, and that's why you see my lab coat as what? As white. Okay, what if I had a red lab coat on? Now watch this one. If I had a red lab coat on, it would absorb all of the wavelengths except for red. And that's the one that's going to be shooting to your eye, and that's why you would see my lab coat as red. Do you see that? So what color are the plants? Green. So what does that mean? That means plants absorb all of the color except for green. And that is what's hitting your retina, and that's why you see it as green. It's actually green and yellow. It's a mixture of these two. So let's do it again. If you have a blue shirt on, why does my eye see your shirt blue? Because the pigment of your shirt is absorbing all the light, all the colored wavelengths here, except for blue. That's the one that's coming and reflecting into my eye, and my brain registers that you have a blue shirt on.
So we don't actually see color, we see the lack of reflection of light.
Yeah, you see the color that's being reflected into your eye. So black is the absence of color. If you have a black shirt on, what's happening is that shirt is absorbing all of that, and nothing is being reflected into my eye. So when I look at your shirt, you say, you have black shirt on. You see that? That's why they tell you, on a hot day in July, wear what color? You wear white, because you're reflecting the light off of the shirt. If you wear black, you're absorbing all of those and the energies, and you'll get overheated quickly. You wear black in July, you're gonna get overheated really quickly. I saw a hand go up. Oh, it's right. So, why did I say all of that? It's because of this. Plants absorb the red and the blue wavelength. They reflect the green. They don't absorb the green. They reflect the green into your eye. And that's why you see them as green. So what's driving photosynthesis? Let's put it together now. What is driving photosynthesis? The red and the blue. Whichever wavelength that is being absorbed by the plant is what's going to kickstart photosynthesis. So even though it says light energy, it's specifically red and blue wavelength of energy. When the sun hits the plant, the plant can't say, no, I only want the red one. No, I only want, no. It doesn't do that. It says it takes the red and the blue and reflects the green. I can't use the green, reflect it. So what is really driving photosynthesis is the red and the blue wavelength. Here's the main pigment. I need you to memorize this by tomorrow. Joking. That was a sick joke, bad joke. I'm just kidding, all right? This is my way of saying you don't need to know this, all right? You don't need to know this here, guys. Look, you can tell it's a complicated molecule here, but the only difference between chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B is just this part right here. Instead of CH3, if you have CHO, then you have chlorophyll B. But what did I tell you? Did I say what the most common one is? I don't think I did. I'm going to say it right now. The most common pigment is chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is the most common one. Now, if you looked on the TLC plate really closely, that's why the chlorophyll A band was the heavier one, was the more prominent one. Chlorophyll A is the most common pigment. And then, but do your plants have other pigments? Well, you tell me. Based on the experiment that we did today, did the leaf extract have only one pigment or multiple pigments? Say it.
Multiple.
Multiple pigments. But what's the most common one? Chlorophyll A. Very good. But there are other pigments, carotene and all that. All right. Fun part. Let's say you're not paying attention to me. I think it's time to start. This is called the photosystem. It is found in the thylakoid membrane. You know that pancake? It has a membrane. This guy is found in the membrane of the thylakoid. I find it very difficult to teach this topic using this picture. This is the molecular model of the photosystem. It's got chlorophylls. The green is the chlorophylls embedded within this complex network of proteins. Very difficult to discuss this, but it's nicer to do this one. Actually, I have a better picture. I love this one more because it gives you the whole event. Here's light. Here's the light reaction. 1 week from today, if I ask you to come up here, I'll give you my pointer, and that's all you'll have. Can you describe it? Well, maybe not now, but hopefully by Monday. Because that's where we're going now. I'm going to challenge you, and it could be simply you getting up and presenting it for the class. I'll challenge you in a different way today. You'll see what I'm going to do with it. I need you to pay close attention to this here, because the challenge is coming right after I'm done talking about this. You got two photosystems here. Photosystem 2, photosystem 1. 2 is before 1. How do I remember that? I have this weird way of remembering it. I remember the store that I hate the most at the mall. Can you guess what that is? Forever 21. There you go. I hate that store, right? It cost me a lot of money, right? Forever 21. Get it? Weird way, but it works. But then I add on to that. Hang in there. I'll show you. Photosystem 2 has a central chlorophyll called P680. What's the number? P680. Photosystem 1 has a central chlorophyll called P700. Look how I remember that. The 2 comes before 1 because of that store, Forever 21. But then the lower number, 680, goes with the higher number between these two. The higher number, 700, goes with the lower number of these two. Do you see that? Again, that's how I remember it. If it helps you, use it, free of charge. If you have another way, go ahead. So photosystem 2, P680. Photosystem 1, P700. All right. Now, again, the purple part is a whole mesh of protein. The green are the chlorophylls. This is the light hitting it. So now here's how it starts. The energy from the light energizes the first chlorophyll. The energy from the first chlorophyll goes on to the next chlorophyll. What's going to the next chlorophyll? The energy, not the electrons. The energy from the next chlorophyll goes to the next one, goes to the next one. Oh, look at that. It's a relay system of energy. The energy originates in the sun, and now it's being transferred through the chlorophylls. All of that to activate the central chlorophyll, P680. Once P680 gets energized, it gives off electrons. I always talk about, like, here's the scenario, here's the analogy. I'm walking around with a whole bunch of papers in the hallway, and you zap me with something, I lose the papers. Don't do that though, all right? You zap this guy, loses electrons. You energize P680, you lose the electrons. The electrons now go to what is called the electron acceptor center. Hang on, let's hold the electrons here. P680 has to settle back down. So once it loses the electrons, it says, I need to participate in the next event. Can someone please give me the electrons that I just lost? Can someone, like water splitting, give me the electrons that I just lost? So I can settle back down. Oh, that's why you do this. You do water splitting. You split the water into its three parts, like I told you before. The oxygen leaves through the stomata. The electrons recover the P680. What's left? The hydrogen. The hydrogen is in the thylakoid space at this stage. You have to know what's happening to each one of these. And if you know, then you got this. I'll do it again. The oxygen from water splitting leaves through the stomata, and that's what you're breathing. The electrons go to P680 and settle it back down so it can participate in the next event. I hope you realize that the electrons that the P680 just lost came from the previous water splitting. Then the hydrogen that's left over is in the thylakoid space right here. Okay, let's go back to the electrons and follow. The electrons will go down one of two electron transport chains. Plastoquinone, plastocytosine, that name escapes me there, sorry about that. And ferredoxin. And the cytochrome complex here. Now watch this. As the electrons go through the first chain, a channel opens up to add more hydrogen into that space. So this hydrogen comes from the water splitting. This hydrogen comes as a result of the electron coming through the first chain. So again, the light energy energizes the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll energy moves through the chlorophylls, energizes the central chlorophyll, which is P680. It gives off electrons. P680 settles back down when it gets the electrons from water splitting. The oxygen leaves the stomata, through the stomata. The hydrogen starts building up in here. And as the electrons go through the first one of two chains, more hydrogen gets thrown in here. Oh, what are we building up over here? What is this? Which gradient? Electrochemical gradient. So this is no different than cellular respiration. When you put the hydrogen in the space to activate the ATP synthase, there's no difference here. If you already studied cellular respiration, this should have came to you. It's the electrochemical gradient. You're charging the battery. No difference. So you're charging the battery to activate the ATP. The guy that always sleeps on the job, you see that? It's the same guy, ATP synthase. So in plant cells, catch it. There are two locations for ATP synthase: the mitochondria and the chloroplast. Because plant cells have both organelles. They have a mitochondria and a chloroplast. In animal cells, like your cells, there's only one location for ATP synthase, and that's your mitochondria.
So do they just do glycolysis in the mitochondria? That's it?
The mitochondria does the whole cellular respiration, like your mitochondria in plants.
So it don't do the. It doesn't breathe oxygen.
Say again?
But plants don't breathe oxygen.
Of course they get oxygen.
Yeah, they get it.
Simple diffusion, it goes right through the cell. They don't have to have lungs to do it. The simple diffusion goes right through into the cell. Say again?
They use both things.
Yes. Yeah. Well, hang on. Plant cells use a mitochondria to make energy for the life of the plant. That's its power plant. The ATP that is made by photosynthesis is consumed during photosynthesis to make the glucose. Catch this, please. There's ATP that's going to be made here, but it's going to be used up by the Calvin cycle. This ATP is reserved for making the glucose. Okay, what if a plant cell wants ATP for active transport? It has a mitochondria for that. Plant cells have both a mitochondria and a chloroplast. I know chloroplasts make ATP, but please understand that the ATP produced by the chloroplast is for the sole purpose of making the sugar. If plant cells need ATP, and they do, to get other things done, they have a mitochondria for that. So in plant cells, watch up here please. In plant cells, if this hand was photosynthesis and this hand was cellular respiration, right now the sun is out. This cellular respiration is still going on. Photosynthesis is up here because the sun is out. Sun, right? So in plant cells, the trees outside, they're undergoing cellular respiration and photosynthesis. As the sun goes down, so does the rate of photosynthesis. Eventually it goes down to 0. Why? Because there's no sun outside. But cellular respiration still goes on. Because the plant cell always needs ATP, like you always need ATP. So watch out, don't make that mistake. Photosynthesis does not substitute for cellular respiration. The mitochondria does not substitute for the chloroplast. Plant cells have both of them. Plant cells will carry out both cellular respiration and photosynthesis during the day. At night, it's still doing cellular respiration. It's just that the sun is down, so photosynthesis drops to 0. The sun rises, it goes back up, like that. But this one, cellular respiration, is always going on. Okay, let's follow through with the electrons. The electrons will now go through the first chain of events. Now, what you got to understand is this. The light is also hitting the other photosystem. And it's also energizing the chlorophylls. It's also activating this P700 center. And this guy also gives off electrons. So the same event's happening here as happening here. And this guy needs to settle back down, so it needs electrons. Just like this one. Now this guy settles back down by getting the electrons from water splitting. The P700 settles back down by getting the electrons from the first chain. So the electrons came here, went through here, and then it's going to go to P700.
So they get P700 gets electrons from
the end of this chain. The P700 gives off electrons, and it settles back down by accepting the electrons from the end of the chain that came from this guy. Now let's follow the electrons. These electrons will eventually go to NAD plus, NADP plus, and become NADPH. So these are now your two delivery trucks. NADPH is going to deliver hydrogen and electrons. This guy's going to deliver phosphate and energy. To what? To the Calvin cycle. You haven't made any sugar yet. You're just loading the trucks. Any questions on this before I challenge you with it? Questions? This is the time to ask me any questions on it. Thank you, sir.